to India, uh, we are the third largest economy on a purchasing power parity. We are now the fifth largest economy in the world. People keep on talking about that. The reports are there are so many reports where people keep on saying that this is the lowest cost manufacturing country in the world. There was a report by selected 85 countries. Uh, it has also gone on to say that India uh, has never seen such a period, and the future of India is one of the most golden period. And also, so many reasons are being given, as we are the largest. We have the largest number of two wheelers in the world today. In the car industry, we are going by leaps and bounds. We manufactured over 45 lakhs vehicles and over 38 lakhs cars. We have now the largest diaspora in the world. Our remittance is gone to $100 billion. I mean, things are all rosy and rosy. So I would not like to, we would like to hear from you, but there are two points which I thought people are talking of Amrit Kal for 2047. And I was reading a report to what would be the position between 2023 and 2047. Uh, so I was reading a report which went on to say, so I would also, because our session today is the long-term reforms agenda for India. So when you have a long-term reform agenda for India, I think we are talking of a long-term perspective, what India would be like. Sometimes when I read the newspapers today, I need articles today, I feel very sorry that why I was born in 1950. I mean, if this is what is going to happen, I should have been born now. And if there is a rebirth, I would like to be born again in India. I mean, this is what the history, if the history speaks about. So when I was reading one of the reports on the Amrit Kal, it went on to say very few startling point that, and recently Goldman Sachs came out with a report. I don't know whether you have read it or not. Forget 1943. He said 2075 we would be the second largest economy in the world, taking over USA. I mean, that is what the Goldman Sachs report went on to say. It went on to say that if we grow at 6%, what would be our GDP by 1947? By 2047, it says that if we grow by 6%, our GDP would be $14 trillion. If we grow by 8%, our GDP would be $21.6 trillion. And if we grow by 10%, our GDP would be $32.9 trillion. Now, what are we looking at? If you want to become a developed country in the world, we have to grow by 7 to 8%. I mean, that is what they say, that because our per capita income is so low, in spite of this growth, I mean, per capita income is over $2,000. And if you want to grow and we are thinking of taking a per capita income to $5,000. But if you want to be a developed country, our per capita income has to grow up about $10,000. But there is a report which I was recently reading. There are 2-3 reports which I recently read, that which I want to bring to your notice, that our per capita income by 2027 would go to $3,466. So if this is what is happening, then how do we become a developed country? The point in issue is, sir, that which I was taking few points, that what do we need to do? I mean, where do we need to go? I mean, is everything honky-dory, or there is something issues need to be done? In today's newspaper report, if you must have read that the Calcutta, which we always talk about, that the highest number of companies were, taken out of prosecution in Calcutta, and I was reading the numbers were really startling, that they withdrew prosecution of about 5,101 companies. Cases were withdrawn in Calcutta, which was the highest. And the next city was Patna, which was 674. So things are happening. I mean, recently there was a law which has been recently passed, that, they have on the 42 acts, so many provisions for legislation has been, imprisonment provision has been. But I'll tell you, sir, there was a study which was made in 2021, which went to the extent to say that there are 26,000 clauses can put an entrepreneur to jail for non-compliance of business law, and 69,233 companies, of which 26,134 has imprisonment clause. This is a report for the Observer Research Foundation. I don't know how far this report is correct, but this is the report of the Observer Research Foundation. It bothers me because, as you rightly said, that we need to grow. And how do we grow? Are we being stopped somewhere? Are we being hindered somewhere? Is our growth being staggered somewhere? Why are we? Where we are the largest economy in the world today, as far as the population is concerned. You see, our population is growing. If you look at the population chart by 2000, went on to say that by 2047 our population would be 1.5 billion, and China would have a population of 1.2 billion. There'll be a degrowth, whereas we would be increasing. Now, with this kind of a population and this kind of a market, I don't see any reason that why we should not grow. I mean, we have the largest diaspora in the world, and we got $100 billion on account of diaspora, and we have an NRA deposit to the extent of $100 billion today. And they went on to say that our diaspora would have about, today we have 18 million, the diaspora would go to over 30 million in next few years. But one thing is very worrying, sir, that we renounced. Why are we renouncing? 1 lakh citizens of our country renounce their citizenship every year. This is something which is very, very worrying to me, that, when we say that this is a golden era for India, it is an era, if you look at the IPO, I mean, there is a dearth of IPO all over the world. It is the Southeast Asia which has really excelled in the IPO. The global IPO market led by Asia was 27, though India had not been very successful in IPO, was $27.4 billion, whereas in Europe it was 3.9, as you said, that the Europe is in a downhill. And in America, it was only to the extent of $4.1 billion. So you can understand the situation of Europe, where the IPO was only to the extent of $3.9 billion, America $4.1 billion. I mean, Middle East and Africa was to the extent of $3.7 billion only. Now, Asia, you had $27.4 billion. This is what the situation is as far as the Asia is concerned. This is what the situation is. Then they say that if the global growth, the India will contribute to the extent of 15 to 17% of the global growth. If India is to succeed from 15 to 17% of the global growth, why are we having so many destitute in our country? If you look at the figures of the destitute in our country, the figures that I just made a note of that. I don't know how far the multi-dimensional poverty, which is the new thing to consider the poverty. Still, we have 16.4% of multi-dimensional poverty. I mean, you have a food security, which is the largest food security in the world, but the food security is going to stop at one particular point of time. I think it has been extended into this year, and probably, I don't know whether it will be continued again. But if food security is not extended, then what happens to these people who are in so much of poverty? I mean, this is one area which I thought I will bring to your notice. Overall, we feel that the country is good, the company is great. The issue is that why the people are renouncing their citizenship. And there is also a report, sir, that how many people are taking citizenship of other countries. They are moving out of this country. And it's not the lower middle class or middle class. It's the super rich class who are moving out to this country. And the figure was that over 7,000 people moved out in 2022, and the report is, as on June 2023, over 6,000 ultra-rich individuals, according to the report, which own over $1 million, have moved out of this country. So it's a contradictory situation. On one hand, we say that's a global, it's a golden era for India. On the other hand, we see extreme poverty. On the other hand, we see people renouncing their citizenship. On the other hand, we see people moving out of this country. So this is a contradictory situation which we are facing. I mean, people want to hear from you. I feel very optimistic about India, because I travel to foreign countries very often, and I can see the change, and I can see the people, how they talk about India. In fact, there was a survey of the top billionaires of the world, and they said that which is the best investment destination in the world. The 56% of the billionaires voted for India, and 42% of the billionaires voted for China. I mean, this is again a report. I don't know, sir, how far these reports are correct, but then I leave it to you. I mean, everybody wants to hear you as to how you feel about India. What do you feel the future of the India is? Sir, the ball is in your court. So everybody is looking forward to hear from you. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much, President Khaitan, for giving me this opportunity and to all members of Bharat Chamber for inviting me yet again to speak to you. It is indeed a privilege to be back here. The topic that I'm going to speak about is the long-term agenda for India, but perhaps one good place to start is to just do a very brief recap of where we are right now, because this is the starting point of that 25-year cycle that you were talking about, sir. So, as things stand, India's economy came out of COVID stronger. It's pretty much the only economy, perhaps, in the world which has come out reasonably strong out of this major shock. Not that those 2 years were fun, but still, I think we can say fairly that we came out of it looking better than we were going in on multiple accounts. Some part of it had to do with a lot of macroeconomic restraint that we, during that period, showed. Unlike most other countries, we did not go up and blow our monetary and fiscal budgets on what turned out to be inflationary stimuli, which most other countries did. Instead, we put most of our effort into supply side type things. We kept up with privatization. We kept up with cleaning up of the banks. We kept up with investment in infrastructure and so on. And that dividend is now paying. And of course, it is the dividends also of an earlier era of reforms that we had done. We had introduced the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the GST, the inflation targeting framework, which we had done in the previous 5 years. So all cumulatively, we are benefiting from that. And in the last financial year, we grew by 7.2%. My sense is that we will grow somewhere between 6.5% to 7% this year, which is what the official forecast of RBI and of the chief economic advisor is. So it's a fair, I think that's a fair judgment of where we are. Is inflation an issue? Well, our judgment is that while vegetable prices have gone spiked up a bit right now because of weather-related shocks, the underlying inflationary pressures are not very strong. And, every year we do have a issue with weather-related shocks to vegetable prices, onion prices, tomatoes, potatoes, or whatever happens to be the one of that time. But they tend to, once the 2-3 month cycle of the vegetable growth goes over, they tend to settle down. So at the very least, from a macro stability perspective, also, we are in a good place. Our foreign exchange reserves are about 600 billion. The current account, which had gone up a little bit last year, has come back down to something reasonable. There is a problem right now with exports on the merchandise side, particularly. Some of you are merchandise goods exporters, because external demand right now, as you know, is very weak. There's nothing to do with India. The rest of the world is slowing down, and not surprisingly, exports are slowing down. But commodity prices have also come down. From a stability perspective, therefore, it's not an issue, but from a growth through exports perspective, this is an issue. As far as growth is concerned in the long run, yes, we may aspire to growing at 8% or thereabouts. Thanks to the reforms we have done, I would argue our machinery of our economy is capable of sustaining something like 8% GDP growth rate on a sustained basis. Does that mean then that we should, since growth is going to be in the 6.5% to 7% range, push for this 8%? I would caution against doing this, because at a time when external demand is as weak as it is, if we try to unnecessarily push demand domestically, which we can, because our, we have monetary and other tools that we could use, but it would be unnecessarily stress our external sector, because exports simply would not be able to keep up with the imports we would generate if we push for that extra little bit of growth. So rather than doing that, I would think we should as things stand, we should accept this little bit of slowdown from 7.2 to wherever it is, let's say 6.8 or whatever you think is the growth rate, and instead focus on keeping on building the supply side. Because the world economy goes through cycles. Just like it's going through an downturn right now, it will go through an upturn somewhere. At that point in time, we should be ready for taking over markets. So keep investing in making sure our own systems are good. So build the infrastructure, build the capacities, keep doing the regulatory and other cleanups that we need to do, keep improving the system. 6.5% is nothing to sniff at. The domestic system is in good shape. So use the domestic market to cushion the external shock and keep building out capacity. The good times too will come, but we should be ready. At that point, it is no point in trying to build capacity, because we should be in a position to grab market shares at that time. Meanwhile, our services exports, although they are no longer growing at the blistering pace we did in 21 and 22, they are still growing. And hiring had slowed down a little bit and again picking up. So our sense is that, again, the services economy, including the services exports economy, is doing very well. The domestic part of the services economy is doing especially strongly, as you may have seen from the latest PMI readings that you've got. And you can even see it otherwise. I mean, try booking a hotel room anywhere in the country, and you'll have a tough time. Or try to book airline tickets or anything related to travel, tourism, etc. It's completely packed out. Try and book yourself a restaurant or even very expensive ones, and they're all packed out. So there is domestic demand, and I would warn against trying to put more kerosene in the fire at this juncture. Think of it like this. We were originally driving in a rattly old Ambassador. We have upgraded to maybe Mahindra Thar. But that does not mean we just press the accelerator. This is a car that is in good shape to take the potholes, but that means that you still have to drive carefully. So we now are on a highway. When we get the clear highway, we will press the accelerator. But I am not of the view that we should try to push it, because in the end, do remember that growth is about compounding. The most powerful tool in the world is compounding. And this has to be kept going for the next 25 years. So what we shouldn't do, and here history is an important thing, we should not attempt to do what we did about a little over a decade ago after the global financial crisis, which is we tried to pump up growth very hard using our banking system and other things, you will remember. And we paid a very big price for it. Yes, we got 1 or 2 years of slightly higher growth, but then we got cleaning up that. Since I was involved in cleaning up the banks, let me tell you, it is not a fun thing to do. We should never have to do it again. And so we cost us 5 years of growth for 1 year of slightly better growth in the year 2010. So I don't think we should even attempt it. So there is where we are. Keep our banking system clean, allow natural organic growth to do, and it's doing well enough, and build up our supply side. What also we should avoid doing, and this is Asimit, is also not get caught in what happened to the ASEAN countries after the Asian crisis. Remember, all of these countries at one stage were growing at 7, 8, 9%. And then they had the Asian crisis, and many of these countries never came back. Thailand, for example, has never grown at those kinds of rates ever again. So very, very careful. Never sacrifice macroeconomic stability for a few percentage points of extra growth. This is about compounding. China got here by compounding. So we have got to compound. And yes, there will be short periods when we can even hit 9% growth. But we should be ready for it when that opportunity comes. So that's where we are at. Now comes the issue. What do we need to do to have a system that can sustain these kinds of growth? You're absolutely right, sir, when you say that we have an opportunity now of really emerging as a world power. In the last decade, we have gone from the 10th largest economy in the world to the 5th largest economy in the world in dollar terms, 3rd largest in PPP terms. In the next 3-4 years, we will become the world's 3rd third largest economy. Some of it is because of our own growth. Of course, Germany and Japan, which are above us in the ladder, will help the cause somewhat by not growing at all. In fact, Germany's economy is shrinking right now. So do remember that these are in some ways low-hanging targets. We will probably go past Germany in 18 to 24 months and Japan in a little bit longer. So we are right. Our GDP in last financial year was 3.8 trillion. Germany was 4.3, but it is going to decline. And Japan is at about 4.9, and it's also not really growing. So these are in some ways low-hanging targets. We should be able to, in a few years, be able to become larger economies than them. But also do remember that the next two in the queue are very far away. China is a $19 trillion economy. And the US is, I think, somewhere $25 trillion economy. So they are far away in terms of the cycle is concerned. But we will, meanwhile, keep doing reforms. So what are those reforms? So to understand the kinds of reforms we want to do, you all know this because you all experienced it, but I'll still tell you the kind of reform we did so that you know why we want to do what we want to do next. So starting from if you go back to the 1990s, when we began to reform our economy, our basic agenda in the beginning was to liberalize the economy. So if you remember, the word reform and liberalization were used interchangeably. Why? Because we had a license permit system. We were liberalizing the economy. So reform meant liberalization. Now, as soon as we began to liberalize, we also began to realize that markets require certain frameworks to function in. So very quickly, we began to get scandals like Harshad Mehta scandal and this and that. So misuses also began to happen. And so in the 90s, by the late 90s, we also began to introduce the regulatory frameworks for those markets. So we opened up the market and created the sectoral regulatory frameworks for those. So for example, since I talked about financial markets, SEBI actually came into existence in 1989, but it's only in the mid-90s that it began to get any teeth. And similarly, you began to get the Competition Commission of India, the Telecom Regulatory Authorities. So all the sectoral regulatory authorities got built. Then around about 2000 onwards, we began to finally get serious about building world-class infrastructure under the Vajpayee years. And so for a period from the 90s into the 2000s, we got a burst of growth coming from this kind of stage of liberalization. It opened out sectors, created some frameworks, some initial efforts to build out infrastructure and so on. Of course, we had the telecom, mobile telephony, digital revolution also happening. So that created some space for growth. And so this is the cycle of growth that took us till about 2007 or thereabouts, when, of course, the global financial crisis hit us. But also remember, our own dynamics from this generation of growth actually petered out by this time. We tried to keep growth growing by unnecessarily opening up the banking credit taps, which generated a little bit of growth for a period, but then it caused all kinds of problems. So by the time this government came to power in 2014, that entire cycle of growth had ended. And we had, in fact, impaired our banking system in the process of trying to extend it. So we became, if you remember, the fragile five. Our growth was sputtering by 2014, 15, 16, and there were all kinds of scandals and so on. So then at that stage, a new cycle of reform began to be put in place. Now, this cycle of reform was not about opening up specific sectors or opening up, creating regulatory bodies for those specific sectors. I'm not saying that everything had finished, but more or less by this time, things had opened up. So the next round of reforms, which has happened essentially over the last decade, is about creating the big picture frameworks for the functioning of a market-based, entrepreneurship-based, innovation-based economy. So what were they? First of all, you had to anchor the macro economy. And for doing that, you created the inflation targeting framework. Now, India was never a high inflation country in the sense Argentina is a high inflation country, but we were an economy with 8 to 12% type inflation. We anchored it to 2 to 6%. And since then, Inflation has been basically in that 2 to 6% range. It has gone out of it on the downside twice and on the upside once. But we can say that we have lowered our original inflation pressures on the system. You get the occasional, now the occasional spikes happen because of vegetable prices or somehow. There's no underlying gathering of inflationary pressures. Other things we did, introduce the insolvency and bankruptcy code. Why? It creates the framework for a creative destruction and innovation-based economy. Anything there is risk-taking means some of it will go wrong, and you have to have a system of cleaning that out along the way. You can't have warehouses like BIFR, storing all your mistakes along the way. Third, we needed to create an internal market, so GST. And so we introduced the GST, and you can think of it as a free trade agreement that India signed with itself. So all of your businessmen, and for all its flaws, the GST is a radical improvement on whatever used to exist before. I've said this before in talks here, and I think most people will agree with that. I'm not saying that there aren't problems, but I'm quite certain that our grandchildren will be using some version of this same machinery, both for insolvency and bankruptcy and for GST. They can, of course, I hope, improve upon it, but the main framework has been put in place. And I can keep going on about these kinds of big frameworks. There were some leftover stuff from the previous generation of reforms. They also have been now completed. Things like privatization has got done to listing of LIC, privatization of Air India. And at the very least, the argument has now been won. It's no longer a debate issue. It's now a tactical issue of doing it. Same thing as there were some legacy sectors that were still closed, like drones, defense sector, cartography and geospatial. There were all these ridiculous telecom regulations on the OSP sector and so on. And those were also removed in the course of the last few years. So by and large, the framework of running this economy is done. So the question now arises, what is the next generation of reforms we need to do, which is what I'm going to talk about. So the first bunch of things that we now need to do is already underway. I'm personally involved in a lot of it. And this is called process reforms. So these are not the very big headline grabbing reforms. These are boring nuts and bolts reforms that we have to do. They have to go sector by sector, go rule by rule and change them. And it's not fun stuff to do. But somebody has to do it. And this is where the real crux of reform now lies. So let me give you some examples. And I'll give two examples, which I hope, I would assume that between the two, most of you will have experienced either of them. One of them is the Indian intellectual property ecosystem, particularly patents. I don't know if I've spoken about this last time also. Yeah. So we have done a lot of work in this. Last time when I probably spoke to you, I was getting it done. Now it's in process, and you may already begin to feel the difference.
You said there it takes a lot of time to get the patent.
Yes, getting patents in India used to take something like 5 to 7 years, by which time the technology is already changed. What's the point of doing it? So till 2016, we used to do only 9,000 patents a year. Okay. Today, we do around about 32, 33,000 patents a year. Now, that's an improvement, except when you remember that the US does 350,000 patents a year. And China does 500,000. Now, admittedly, of those 500,000, a lot of it is garbage. But even if you include the good stuff, China does a few 100,000 patents. So if you want to be in this game, we need a proper patenting system. I made a lot of argument about improving this over the last 1 year. Most of these are now in process. So the systems are being improved. Artificial intelligence type tools are being introduced. But most importantly, we are dramatically expanding the number of examiners and controllers in the system. So those of you who are in the system, I would love to have feedback from you over the next year or so about whether or not this patenting system has genuinely become fast. Because we are effectively trying to quadruple the capacity in the system, partly through having more people, partly through having better systems and other things. But our idea is in the next few years to take the number of patents we do to something like 1 lakh a year. And, in not some distant future, by 2025 or somewhere thereabouts, we should be able to hit these numbers. So, of course, some of it requires more inflow, but there is such a large backlog that we should be able to hit it just by clearing some of the backlog. So my sense is that India's patenting system, we are in the process of cleaning it up already, and it should actually already be somewhat visible. But by this time next year, it should be very clearly visible. If it's not very clearly visible, I need to know. So please provide that feedback.
Visible because we have now 3 patent experts in our office in Bombay, where we had only 1. So, and we registered, I took the figure, this year we registered about 2022 over 34,000 patents.
Okay.
So that's the figure we got from my office.
So there you go.
Yeah.
So we are already,
Yeah,
the system is improved.
Yeah.
But this needs to be 3 times the number in 2 years' time. So, we are thinking in those scales. Unless we think in serious scale, we cannot play this game. So this is our patent. So let me tell you about the current battle that I have decided to pick. So this was last year's battle, which I have now getting implemented. Now the new battle I'm fighting now, which will get implemented in the next year, is something called legal metrology. Now, some of you may actually be great sufferers of this. For those who do not know what this is, these are the laws related to weights, measures, and labeling. And it is a major, probably the single biggest source of harassment of business in this country. What happens here is essentially the minor infractions of in this law allows for criminalization. So, for example, you may have, let's say you have a label, and in that it's supposed to have the ingredients, and you misspelt the word ingredient. That is an infraction under the Legal Metrology Act. Fair enough. Now, in the first instance, you are supposed to pay a penalty. But in the second instance, supposing the next round you had the semicolon incorrectly put, you can actually be sent to jail. Now, let me show you what happens as a result of this particular clever way of putting this system together. Whoever created it spent a lot of thought on it. We did a survey of how many infractions happened under this, I think for the year 2021, and we found that there were first instance cases were 1.2 lakhs. Now, guess how many there were for the second round? 12. So I can tell you how much rent seeking happened. 1.2 lakhs minus 12. Right? Doesn't require great genius to work out, roughly speaking, what goes on. And this is essentially where the real Inspector Raj still lives on. Now,
we always, in the board meetings where I'm on the board on several companies, the first thing which I did when this act came into force, you have a provision of officer in default. So what we did was we always appointed one of the persons to be an officer in default as far as the Legal Metrology Act is concerned. So that
this is from 1976.
Yeah. So this
law in 1976.
Yeah. So they have a provision for officer in default.
Okay.
So you are absolutely right that it was very scary law. Absolutely.
So let me tell you also the source of this law. One should name and shame. It's important to name and shame. The source of this law is not the British. Very often, we have colonial era laws, very bad, very bad. This is not the British who did it. We created this law in 1976 based on the report of the Honorable Joint Secretary, Sir Mr. S.K. Maitra. And the Honorable Mr. S.K. Maitra wrote a report on the Legal Metrology Act. And you should read this report because it is a true act of genius. You should really read it. So what is the basis on which he created these extreme provisions in the Metrology Act? He didn't go and survey how many mistakes were being made. He didn't look through the law. He instead went on several pages rant on Bengali sweet shops. I'm not kidding about this. You have to read this. So the whole basis of this law is a rant he did on the fact that when you go to a sweet shop and you buy sweets, the guy who weighs the sweets puts the box in which he's on the weighing machine, and therefore the weighing machine includes the weight of the box in the sweets. I'm not making it up. I mean, this would make a great surreal, a satirical piece of work, which would be, worthy of Yes Minister or something. You should read this report. I will send it to you. So please distribute it to see, the wonders of literature from the 1970s. And I've written articles about it. I mean, it's important to, have, remember such contributions. And he says that, for every box, since the box price is this, and the weight of the box is this, and the average shondesh is this, therefore, for every sale that is made for over of so many kgs per kg, 30 paisa worth of sweets is not being given to the buyer. And then he makes some completely arbitrary calculation how many sweet sellers there are in the country and how many sweets they are selling. It's not based on any survey. This is just sitting in the meeting room with his batchmate sipping government chai. He's making this up. And then he says, therefore, and then he puts every sweet seller in the country must be making 30,000 rupees worth of benefits out because of this. And basically the point he's making is that this is the single biggest crime in the country and that there must be exemplary punishment because of this. So I've actually written about this in an article in Economic Times about 2 months ago, also pointing out the activities of Mr. S.K. Mishra. By the way, the Honorable S.K. Mishra was also the guy who drafted the Bank Nationalization Act. So he was a serial offender. Now, Maitra, S.K. Maitra. So the net result of all of this is that you ended up with that Metrology Act in that format. Now, the result of this criminalization is, and I showed you, year after year, tens of thousands of unnecessary harassment by legal metrology inspectors is done for minor infractions. This clearly leads to rent seeking and corruption, and something needs to be done about it. Now, some of those provisions, which will about a third of them, will get done with this new Jan Vishwas bill that is coming. Some legal metrology provisions will get removed by that, or decriminalized, not removed, decriminalized. Another 2/3 are there. We will do something about them over time. But I'm just giving you the kinds of things that these are the real bells and whistles of the system. And so we will be beginning to do them. Now, it is not the case that we want to ease up the Legal Metrology Act or other acts of this nature, because there is a reason why it's there. There are genuine consumer protection things that you need to look after. You don't want people to be selling 400 grams and marking it as 500 grams of soap or whatever it is you sell. So there are genuine reasons. So, and there has to be a certain system of gradation, but that gradation has to be a meaningful one that is proportionate to the crime. So this is not some great rocket science that we have to invent. This is a problem in every single country in the world, and they have found simple solutions for this. So, look out for reports that we will be publishing in this general space. But there are others that I can also talk about as well. And at every stage, one has to be very, very careful, because those who are pushing for certain change always try for maximalist kind of solutions, which can actually damage the thing you're trying to do. For example, in the case of the mediation bill is needed because you need mediation in certain legal framework for mediation. But those who proposed it in the beginning, and that thankfully was removed, was attempting to make this a mandatory process. Now, if you make legal mediation mandatory, then it loses the whole meaning of it. All you do is add extra 6 months to the process. So, it has to be based on some common sense, because even those who supposedly do reforms very often attempt for maximalist positions that are not reforms. So again, we have to be very careful in that the baby is not thrown out with the bathwater. So that is basically the kinds of reforms we are now doing. Now I'm going to talk about the reforms we need to do. These are things I must have spoken to you, because I have been ranting about them for the last several years. So I'm 100% sure I must have ranted about them even in my previous things. The two big reforms we need to do has to be legal reform and administrative reform. We have to do them. And they will not get done unless there is widespread public support for this. And that's why I keep talking about this, because unless there is widespread public support for this, at any point in time, whenever we do it, it's going to be disruptive. So at any point in time, there is no incentive for the government of that time to really shake this up. Because whenever you do it, there's going to be resistance. There's going to be, initially, there will be chaos, at least to start with. But you have to do this. And let me start with administrative reform and tell you why this is important. You see, the administrative system that we have was set up essentially for control by the British. Not surprising, they were a colonial government. The real purpose of creating the system was to control the population. So they created an administrative system for doing that. After independence, we should have changed it. But instead, we opted for a socialist pattern of growth, which of course meant that you wanted even more control. So ironically, by the 80s, the bureaucracy had even more power than it did in 1947 to interfere in your lives. And so you had this extremely powerful bureaucracy. Now, since the 90s, we have done reforms and there has been progress. You'll all agree. But this progress has not happened because of administrative reform. It has happened because the bureaucracy has less powers to interfere in your life. So their powers have been curtailed, but it's the same bureaucracy. And it is still set up essentially for control. Now, there are circumstances where that particular architecture actually helps, like during a lockdown, right? Just imagine, we went through months of lockdown, a country our size with 1.4 billion plus people, and we managed these lockdowns, which even advanced countries had difficulty. Why is it that we can run a lockdown but can't fix our potholes? Because the system is set up for that. So therefore, if you want to see the true ability of our bureaucracy, have a lockdown. They're really good at it, because that's what it's set up to do. Control your lives. Now, there are situations where it works, but under most normal circumstances, it's a bad thing. And so this is not about an individual bureaucrat. You can have all the brilliant bureaucrats you want. It makes no difference. The system is not set up for delivery of service. It is set up for control. So we have to begin to undo this and rebuild it. And I'm going to give you an illustration of this. Where for much of the country does the bureaucracy really hit the ground and affect people's lives? It's in general administration. So in districts, for example, it's the district magistrate. He's the king of that district. But who is the district magistrate? He or she is usually a 33-year-old junior official with no experience in running anything. Forget about running the lives of millions of people. They are usually there for only 18 months at a time in any particular district. They have no chance of delivering anything. Most of them are the chairman of something like 100 district level committees. There is no chance of even attending most of those. And every time somebody has a new idea, we will create a district committee to look into it. So naturally, there are many district committees of things. We don't take general administration seriously. We don't take city administration seriously. The really good quality senior officials are not the municipal commissioners. particularly of the smaller towns. At least in the bigger town like Kolkata or something, the municipal commissioner is still a senior person. But of Shiliguri, nobody even knows who they are. Why? Because of the lopsided nature of what the system has been set up to do. If an official who is just 33 years old is sent to a district, asked to run the district, is just there for 18 months, it takes at least a year to find out where various levers in the system are. And the person is too junior to even call up the headquarters, depending on what that is, to even ask for help. Instead, the senior experienced people are doing what? Fisheries secretary. Now you tell me, what's the point of this exercise? So what we have to do is to turn this on its head and send the senior officials to the ground, actually run districts. They need to have at least 3-year terms, so that they can at least understand. At least 1 year they will figure out, that the rest of the 2 years they'll do some administration. We need to put much more of our administrative capacity in the place where it's needed, not in the secretariat where they're interfering with your lives. So this is a very important part of the restructuring of the administration. I just gave you one illustration of this. A similar thing needs to be done with our judiciary. I mean, we have 40 million plus cases in the system. Clearly, the judiciary has plenty of time to take midnight bail applications, to go on long holidays during summer, winter, Diwali, but does not have time to clear these things. Again, there's no point in blaming any individual judge for this. The system is set up in such a way that it is not meant to deliver justice. Again, it's basically a system meant for control. So we need to get serious about this. And the only way you're going to get these changes is not through normal day-to-day effort of any government, either the state or the center or anywhere, because this is these changes will be disruptive, and it will only happen when there is genuine demand from the wider public for something to be done in this. But there is unfortunately not much debate. I mean, there are a few people like me who talk about it in newspaper articles, but on the ground there has to be demand for change in basic administration and the role of the state. The point I'm making to you is that the last 30 years were spent removing the Indian state from doing the things it should not do. Now the time has got to be to get the Indian state to do the things it should do: deliver justice, fix the potholes. Yeah. So that's where I am at. Let me say that at least in some of the areas like process reforms, things are getting done. Finally, we are paying attention to this. These are nuts and bolts stuff. Very often you may not see in the newspapers because these are not headline grabbing. But these are things, hopefully, in your individual industries, you will begin to see change here, change there. There will be the odd backsliding as well. Be clear that there is lots of resistance to many of these changes. Sometimes it's good reasons. I mean, it's not that every change is good, and some breaks are important in the system, but we are making progress in these kinds of reforms. And so what do I think will happen over the next 25 years? Well, hopefully the next 25 years will see some of these big reforms. I think we should be able to do the process reform part in the next 5 years. These are doable because once we get the hang of something, the machine, a certain momentum gets built. After all, in the end, nobody would have believed that we would have built the infrastructure we have built in the last 5 years, but we have built it because now we have got used to building world-class airports, world-class highways. We just do it as a natural matter of course. So just like we have built better and better intercity infrastructure, we can now build better and better intra-city infrastructure, and we are again beginning to build that. One city where we are now building massive amounts of intra-city infrastructure is Mumbai. I don't know if you visit Mumbai, but just go to Mumbai and go to any tall building. And in any direction you look, there is construction going on. It may not be fun living in Mumbai right now, because of so much construction. But let me say that Mumbai is right now the largest concentration of cranes in the world. It has more cranes than either Shanghai or Beijing or any other city that you may think may be the high growth place. Mumbai has the largest concentration, and huge amount of new infrastructure is getting built. Those who are familiar with Mumbai will know that Mumbai is basically a thin long island. It's a thin long island with essentially 2 highways going up along it and 2 train lines going up it. These were both introduced during British times. Okay, we have invested in them since then by building over bridges or whatever. But basically, this is the same thing the British left us. For the first time in 100 years, we are dramatically upgrading this. So there is now a coastal road that is being built, 22 kilometers along the western side coast of Mumbai. And that will be, so we'll basically go from 2 highways to 3 highways. Much of that construction has already got done. So all the difficult parts of it, like building a tunnel through Malabar Hill, for example, done. There are some very cool things that are being done for this as well. There are these interchanges built out at sea, swirling interchanges. There are these bridges, all kinds of very, very cool stuff. Much of it has been built. So this is now, I think, less than 12 months to completion. Similarly, new link has been built to the mainland, called the Trans Harbour Link. That's been completed. I think it's now, any day now, it will be opened in the next few months. There is a brand new airport being built, Navi Mumbai, which should be done in about 36 months time. Then a completely new metro system is being built. 13 new lines are being put. And because it's a thin, long island, it basically is one very long line, and then there are cross lines. Some of those cross lines already have started. But the main line number 3, which will start essentially in Cuff Parade, which is the southernmost point in the island, and will go to Seeps, which is the northern end of the island. So this line, all the underground digging is done, and they're now covering it up. The stations are getting built out. And again, I think by this time next year, you should be able to actually travel on it. It will be on day 1, the most heavily used metro line in the world. So this massive makeover of intra-city infrastructure is getting done in Mumbai. Now, I know that living in Mumbai over the last few years may not have been great because, as I said, living in a construction zone is not fun. But you can see all of this is not theoretical. You just go to a tall building. It's visible to you that this is getting done. And now the cover-ups of the digs are being done. Same thing is happening with the coastal road. Now the tarmac is being laid for the road. So something similar will happen in other cities too at some point, maybe Kolkata as well. One of my dream projects is to do the derelict land along the Hooghly River, which is would be really upgrade Kolkata, but at some point. But we are building the intracity infrastructure. So given all of this effort that we are putting in, I think we would be able to sustain very high rates of growth. Now, sometimes it'll be high, sometimes it'll be a little low, but I think the sheer compounding of this is what we should aim for. And as I said, at no point in time should we sacrifice slightly higher growth for messing that compounding process up. The game is the compounding. Let that play out. We have the advantage, of course, of being a large country. So to some extent, we have a cushion against the rest of the world, perhaps not growing in the same way. We have the advantage that the geopolitics of the world has begun to play in our favor. Our demographics is now playing in our favor. And many other small things are playing in our favor. So I'm quite confident that, the next 25 years genuinely will be an interesting time for Indian history. And, nothing is God-given. It requires effort. We have to keep doing these efforts. So from our side in the government of today, next 25 years, somebody else will be there. But at least seeing it from our perspective from today, the big things I mentioned are the things some our generation will do, some will be left over for future generations. But I think the effort, the sheer accumulation of effort and of course, the effort of the private sector, innovation, investment, risk-taking, because this is, after all, a journey we all are on. It's not like the government is doing this. And so the idea is that this accumulated effort, I'm quite certain, will take us quite a long way over the next 25 years. Thank you very much.
There are many present here who would be very willing to pose some questions to you. But before they do that, I thought I'll take up a few points which you said on the new generation reform. The one, as you rightly said, that there are many laws where there are provisions for imprisonment, which is not only hinder in the ease of doing business, but which also come in the way of ease of living also. So we must create a situation where our living is also comfortable apart from doing business, because only when we have an ease of living, we can do better business. So I thought that is very important, picking up various legislation and looking into it and deciding, the penal provision, the imprisonment provision are taken care of. One of the latest example, which I said was very punitive, was a penalty to the extent of 250 crores in relation to the digital law, that you could get a penalty of 250 crores. I mean, that was something which the law had just came, and 250 crores of penalty. The point which I was trying to say, sir, was, as you said about the mediation bill. I was addressing Supreme Court of Virginia in USA. I was invited to speak on mediation. And to me, it was astonishing when a particular judge and a particular lawyer informed us that in America, 90% of the commercial disputes are resolved through mediation. And it is not a compulsory mediation. It's a mediation where you either choose or you don't choose. But there is a law here in India, I think you need to look into it, the Commercial Courts Act, where you have this mandatory provision of mediation. So I think this needs to be looked into, that in the Commercial Court Act, the mandatory provision of mediation is taken care of.
And with a very poor outcome ratio.
Yeah, because you see what happens, sir, that we go for it also has a proviso that if you are seeking an interim order of injunction, then it is going to delay, because then I will not be able to get an injunction. So if I seek an injunction, then I don't have to go for a mediation. So therefore, it does not serve any purpose to have a compulsory provision of mediation. Mediation has always to be voluntary.
Yes.
The other issue was, sir, which you said about the judiciary. No commercial offices ever stop functioning. A government also do not stop functioning. There are many countries in the world, not many, I'd say few countries in the world, where the judges can take leave. The court keeps on functioning, but the judges are entitled to, like we have in our offices, leave encashment. You are entitled to 2 months of leave. So you take leave, but the court keeps on working. I mean, this is the provision in many parts of the world. I think this is also one area where you said that delay in justice delivery system, if this could be looked into. I know, but I should not be quoted on this because I'll be thrashed if I next day in the court. So Udit Bhau, please don't me on this, that this is a suggestion I gave, but this is what is happening in many countries as far as the judiciary is concerned. So I thought that these 2 points which you said on this issue, but rest I leave it to the audience. Yes, he has been our former finance secretary, Mr. Sunil Bhau.
Mr. Sanyal, I have 2 questions. I'll put them briefly to you. If India is to grow in the coming years, it can do so optimally if its component states share in the vision of central planners, rather than adopting adversarial positions based on narrow political considerations. Question is there a case for a thorough overhaul of the constitutional provisions that regulate center-state relations? Do you think the time is right, or is it not? Or even to think about this? This is number one. And number two is, Can I ask the second one as well? Given the vagaries of the climate we are witnessing worldwide, and the fact that despite our wishing it away, our dependence on fossil fuel will remain in the foreseeable future, is there a case for incentivizing on a policy basis investments in clean coal technologies? I don't see that happening at all. I was power secretary in West Bengal at one point in time when we did a lot of deep down reforms in the systems. But I don't see this happening at all. Thank you.
So, changing the constitution for changing center-state relations is a very complicated thing. I've not applied my mind to it, to be fair. But let me say that if you're going to be a democracy and you're going to allow for different governments to exist at different layers of government, these kinds of conflicts will be there. It's almost inherent to the system, and in some ways it's okay, because you allow for different kinds of machinery to different kinds of dynamics to exist at different scales. The game is that whatever it is should be reviewed from time to time, and for that purpose we do have something called the Finance Commission, which comes every few years. We are due one very shortly. My view is that the system, of the many problems we need to solve, this is not the critical problem. By and large, and my judgment is that this system roughly works. Whether, for example, in the GST case, yes, there is regular grumbling about various aspects, etc. But the GST system actually works, with 2/3 of the votes coming from the states and 1/3 from the center. The system more or less trundles along. And while there may be problems in the GST system functioning, etc., it's not the center-state relations that is the source of the problem. Very often, many of these are administrative problems. And in fact, sometimes the problems that exist, sometimes the center is on the side of some states and others. That kind of thing will be there. That's part of being a democracy. Unless you want a completely totalitarian top-down system, you have to allow for some amount of friction. That is what we as a country have agreed to do. So my thing is that of the many things we need to do, this is not a central thing. Now, as far as green coal technology, I'm not an expert on this either. But let me say that as a general principle, this is the following approach we have taken. First of all, we are a country that is not endowed with hydrocarbons. We have some coal, very little of crude and gas and so on. But we are a country that has been blessed with a large amount of sunshine. So our willingness to move on to some solar type thing is something we want to do. Our main problem with a solar thing is, of course, one is the current solar technology itself is very inefficient. There have been now for several decades people claiming that they're going to make some breakthrough, but in fact, the photovoltaic technology we today use is in fact a product of the 1970s. We've improved on it, but it is basically a 1970s technology. So one, we need to improve on it. Two, even with this technology, there is a major flaw of storage. Now, most of the discussion on storage tends to go on to lithium. The reason it is lithium is that lithium is light and it's for mobile movement of storage. But it's otherwise not the most efficient way to store anything. The real game is about static storage, which is the storage of electricity for industry or whatever it is. And that has to be stored because, for whatever it's worth, sunshine is not a reliable thing. There are cloudy days, you have night time, there are all kinds of other things. You need static storage. And so the big thing that we have paid our attention to is to find ways of creating static storage. So lithium and all those things will happen. It just happens we've also happened to discover some lithium in India. There are some very large lithium sources in India, in Jammu and so on. But the current big emphasis is on static storage. And the one that we are attempting to do, among the others, but the one that we have focused on is hydrogen, green hydrogen. Basic idea, I'm not a technical person, but basic idea is use the electricity to create, to split water in the day to create oxygen and hydrogen, and burn it at night to convert it back to electricity and so on. Now, pretty much all the very large companies, whether it's Tata's, Ambani's, Adani's, you name it, they are investing very large amounts of resources in green hydrogen. This is the reasoning behind it, is that we need some static system. Now, this system, no other country in the world is investing as much into static hydrogen. Japan, for example, is experimenting with cars, and Toyota is investing into, was doing into hydrogen cell fuel, etc. That is not what we are doing. Our game is all about static hydrogen, because we think if we can find a breakthrough of some sort, whether it's hydrogen or some other area, in static versions of this would be a big beneficiary. Now, no other country is going, not no other country, but the advanced countries are not going to invest in this for a very simple reason. Their problem is a different problem. Their problem is they burn most of their energy in winter when there is no solar available. And there is no way you're going to source so much hydrogen that you can last 4 months. So this is a pointless thing for them to do. So they are not going to invest in this technology at all. We, on the other hand, have a different problem. Our spike happens to be at the very time in which we get the best sunshine, which is June. Right? We are using it to cool things. So it's aligned as far as we are concerned. Solar energy is aligned to our requirements. We need to crack the nighttime problem. And so this hydrogen is something I'm just telling you why we are pursuing. Now, this does not mean that we are not going to invest in some amount of traditional fossil fuel based energy. As Germany also recently found out, you need to have a certain amount of cushion in the system from traditional sources. So we are going to keep our thermal plants going. In fact, we're going to add to some of them. I am not an expert on green coal, but I am under the impression that there is some effort in certain places that is being done in this.
So indeed, the point I would like to submit really is that in the east, where we have coal, underground mining has been stopped. Right? It's been so for a number of years. And there are still valuable deposits in these underground. There's a technology called liquefaction of coal, which makes it far more environmentally cleaner than normal coal burning in boilers. So, I mean, this is something that we all those who
But can't states just pursue it on their own? Why? I mean, you attempted to do it. Why would you need a national government effort on this? I mean, I know we do some, but why don't states just take it and run with it? Particularly the ones that have lots of it. Why? I don't know. I mean, I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm just saying.
I was only submitting.
Yeah, I mean, those who know, I'll have a look at it, but I'm no expert in this. But our main effort is towards solar plus some storage.
Thank you. So just to add to what Mr. Mitra was saying is, thank you. Now what he was saying is, the underground coal mining, because coal comes under central, Coal India, for instance. So somehow the other, for last many years, underground coal mining is not happening where it is environment friendly. You just dig deeper. There is infrastructure or equipments available for that to do it very efficiently. And before fossil fuels are completely out of fashion, we can use our national resources by more efficiently mining of coal. That's what I think.
So I'm not averse to this thing. I mean, as I said, we have to be very practical about the whole thing. Even when we have moved most of it to solar, and let's say this hydrogen experiment succeeds, we will require to keep a certain amount of buffer using traditional systems. I am absolutely clear about this, which must, by the way, include nuclear as well. So I am a big believer that you have to have a variety of sources. This idea that, a single source thing, it's too dangerous. And in my view, not necessary also. What we need to do is make sure certain amount of capacity remain. And that should include coal, because for whatever it's worth, to the extent we have any hydrocarbons at all, it happens to be coal. So I am not averse to your point. In fact, I don't know why the original ban had happened. Maybe it's a time to have a relook at it. As I said, I literally do not know much about this subject. So maybe there is a case for relooking at it. And certainly the case that liquefied coal technology, I thought green coal technology is widely used. I'm not aware that it, not really. Okay, so I learned something. But I mean, I've heard about clean coal and liquefying for at least a decade. So I was under the impression that somebody must be doing it.
No, they are doing it. There is a company in Calcutta, in Delhi, who is based doing it. Green, it's Great Eastern Energy. The coal methane they are taking taking a gas out of it, underground mining, and they are doing it. SR is trying to do it because we are working for them as far as the land acquisition. Coal bed. So this is also underground mining.
Manufacturing is also taking place.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
Dhanbad
Okay.
and Raniganj.
Okay.
So it's always nice to hear you and the reforms that you're undertaking. And of course, I would say this administrative and legal, which you mentioned, they are long overdue. And if you're looking at it, it will be revolutionary the way you have described it. I have a simple question that a lot of thing has been done because in the indirect taxes after the GST reforms. But in the direct taxes, we as a businessman, we find that much more needs to be done. So whether it is part of your agenda being part of the Prime Minister's Advisory Council, and in my opinion, that still a lot of corruption remains in direct taxes, although it has become faceless and all. Having said so, all these old cases being dug out and all, if you can have tell us that what is being looked about about that. Yeah.
So on, he's raised a very important question, actually, we also were debating in the chamber just a week back. The direct tax structure for entrepreneurs, particularly, medium-sized people who would not be just sole proprietorships or partnerships, but limited company. The tax structure for entrepreneurs of limited company who are not large enough to have holdco structures is very unfriendly to getting risk capital, because getting into business, bringing risk capital is like getting into a chakravyuh without being able to take back your money without paying further taxes. So be it dividend or buyback tax. Dividend comes, you are taxed at the highest rate, and then so it becomes double taxation because the business has already paid, you pay money to yourself, then if you were to do a buyback, which is a very, very efficient way of returning money to the shareholders, there is a buyback tax also. Which is completely different than what it used to be 15, 20 years back, which brought so much of business risk capital when we are encouraging private sector investments, this could be an area where directionally, Economic Advisory Council can guide the policymakers. Thank you.
So as a general principle, I'm always sympathetic to tax reforms. So be very clear that we have done a bunch of things. That doesn't mean they all work. And if the citizens of the country think, and the entrepreneurs of this country think, and the risk takers of this country think that we need to improve them, then we will improve them. So, I mean, you don't have to convince me. We will work one step at a time through these things and try and improve them.
So one
Yeah.
more thing I would like to point out, or rather ask you, you mentioned about building the capacity on the supply side. And that will be good for times to come. But there's not enough capital in the business in the sense that bankers are still not forthcoming to accommodate the businessmen and to forward the debt because of whatever has happened in the past with the bankers. They're very susceptible of not providing finances. So whether something is being looked into it to pursue the bankers to be able to come forward for that.
So here I will differ with you. I am not going to encourage bankers to do anything because bank loans are growing currently at 16%. This is my judgment is about the limits of the speed at which they can manage the system without crashing it. That's why I keep telling you, this game is about compounding. 16% is as fast as I think the banking system can expand. If you're not getting credit in that 16% expansion, then you just have to wait till that pie keeps growing, because 16% compounded is a very fast rate.
Maybe it's going to the retail sector.
Maybe it's going to retail. That's up to the judgment of the bankers. One thing, and maybe because I'm a banker by profession, is that you should allow the bankers to judge what their risk appetite is. If for whatever reason they don't want to invest into something, that's what it is. Their call, because you have to allow the market-based system to function. If you cannot have that, it's capitalism, except when it is a problem for you, and then it becomes socialism. So you either have capitalism, in which case you have to allow the markets to take their own. So the bankers have to take, even if they take the wrong decision, they should be allowed to take their own decisions, and then allow the system to grow, because that is our best bet than trying, certainly against any kind of encouragement, so to speak, by any government agency to lend faster than this particular 16% number we are now seeing. Even if it's going to retail, you are the beneficiary ultimately. After all, they're buying your products with that. If they're building a house or buying a car, what are they doing with it? So I would be very, very careful. If for example, within the 16%, for whatever reason, we switch it from demand side to supply side, let's say, then the same people will come and complain, yes, now we have credit to build the factory, but nobody wants to buy our products. Right? So don't mess with this. Right? Because if I have to expand both credit to retail and to industry, then it'll suddenly be growing at 20%. And let me tell you, we have tried this in the past and the system crashed. Yeah. So don't mess with the ability of the banks to grow at some sensible pace. Meanwhile, our capital, you can raise money through capital markets. There's been a huge cleanup of the corporate debt markets. We have cleaned it up. There is foreign money coming into the country. My own sense is that while it may not be so easy to get, say, startup money, etc., than it was two years ago, but even that was a bubble. So there has to be some amount of friction in the system. Because if you do not have a system that has a certain amount of friction in the system, then it means that the system is not rationing. You see, you want the demand in the system for funds to be higher than the supply of funds, because that is the basis on which the system chooses the best risk. If anybody who wants to take risk gets capital, then there is no choice. Then you will get garbage investments. So there must be some amount of friction in the system, which forces the financial system to pick and choose. Yeah.
Just a minute. I
have a question. I have now been speaking for quite some time, so you will have to now begin to think of closing it. Another one or two questions. Yeah.
So I was just I was just answering to what Mr. Chajjar was trying to say. Yeah, I'll give you one question which I was trying to say. So two questions or one. That, sir, the issue is that, the large corporate sector is able to raise finance from equity, and as far as the banks are concerned, they will go into The companies, private, public limited companies, and even private limited companies, the rate of taxation for setting up of a new industry has been lowered to the extent of 15%. In India, it is not just the companies who set up the business, it is also the LLP who set up the business, who are small scale, who it is the partnership firms which set up the business, which is also individual sole proprietorship who set up the business. Now, there, if they want to set up a new business, their rate of taxation is not low. I mean, they pay the highest rate of taxation. I mean, depending upon their income, whatever. So I thought that, and it is difficult for them to raise finance from outside because it's their own capital. So therefore, if you don't allow them to have a lower rate of taxation, they will, that money will come to them. Then there can be a growth and further growth as far as. So I thought this was one area which could be
No,
looked into.
taxation
Yeah.
and cleaning up,
Yeah.
making it more friendly is something that, by the way, we are interested in. And at some point in time, we need to have a direct tax code,
Yeah.
which cleans up all of these things.
So I think very well, and one more question. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question here.
Yeah. One from the
One
press,
from
just
here then.
one for.
Just,
Yeah, just a minute. Let Mr. Beriwal.
I just want to straight away ask whether de-dollarization is going to happen or the process has started, and
What,
what
sorry?
de-dollarization? Dollar being replaced by any another currency, maybe BRIC currency or any Indian currency or Chinese currency like that, which is the talk of the, and how it will affect if it is going to happen. Second, how artificial intelligence will affect our industry, business, economy, that I want to know. And third is like.
You have to have the three questions, can't be one question. You'll have to limit it. Let's
As
answer these
per
two and then
your
we go.
convenience, no problem.
Okay. So as far as the rupee is concerned, first of all, be very clear that we are trying to internationalize the rupee in a systematic way. This has got nothing to do with de-dollarization at all. What we are trying to do is to convert the rupee into a hard currency. There already exist many other hard currencies on the planet. There is the pound, there is the yen, there is the euro, there is the Singapore dollar. So we will become another hard currency. This does not in any way have any impact on the role of the US dollar as a anchor currency to the world. You have one anchor currency, but many hard currencies. Our attempt is merely to become yet another hard currency. This is in no way interfering with the role or not role of the US dollar. This conversation unnecessarily gets conflated. These two are completely different conversations. And as far as I can tell, for the time being, the US dollar is the anchor currency for foreseeable future. But our own attempts are a very clearly nothing to do with that. Our attempt is to simply harden the Indian rupee so that over time it becomes a reserve currency and is more widely used. Outside of the currency, we can open up the system. There are other countries who have done it in recent times. For example, the yuan has hardened the currency over time. It wasn't done in one shot. It was step by step done. So we will also do it step by step because there are many microstructures, markets, regulatory changes. We will do a few changes. So we have already, you have seen, expanded out our payment system to UAE, France, etc. We are allowing the rupee to be paid back and forth. We are allowing people to use the rupee to denominate imports and exports. So over time, we will, hopefully other countries will begin to use Indian bonds to hold their foreign exchange reserves and so on and so forth. Over a decade, India will become basically a hard currency. This, as I said, is nothing to do with the role of the dollar as the anchor currency to the world. That is a completely different discussion for another day. And artificial intelligence, first of all, this is for you to work out, not for us. People keep asking government officials how artificial intelligence would improve the world. Let me tell you, if I knew, I would be Elon Musk. I wouldn't be coming here to speak to you. So this is really for entrepreneurs to figure it out. My job is a very limited one, is that as things evolve, if there are some regulatory requirements that may be needed, but this is a major debate in the world, of which we are also one. So at some point in time, if regulatory requirements are there, then we will look into it. Otherwise, the government should not be involved in trying to guess where artificial intelligence is going.
We shall have a program on artificial intelligence in the chamber.
So,
Their last
See,
last three questions, please. One from here, one from this side, and one.
I have always been far more concerned with natural stupidity than with artificial intelligence.
Mr. Sanyal, in that wonderful number of figures we mentioned about China, 19 trillion. One of the main things success attributed to China is that 30-year population policy of one child. Do you think at any point in the future, India will address this because it is very politically sensitive?
No
And
need.
You think we can go and
It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. India's birth rates are already
below
at
2,
or below replacement rates.
or we are below 2 already?
No, 2 is not the replacement rate. It's 2.2.
Okay.
2.2 is the replacement rate. We are at about 2.1, which is already below replacement rate. Just look around you. How many of you replace yourselves? You will not. So the point is, this is not an issue. Indian population now is only growing because we are living longer, which is a good thing. So but there is no biological expansion of the population anymore. There are many states in India where, in fact, we will have problems with our existing schools because there are not enough students, like in Himachal.
You can't fill up.
Yeah. So in fact, we don't have this problem. I strongly urge any attempt to mess around with our demographics using population control. China will pay a very big price for its one-child policy. People do not understand what happens if you have one-child policy for 2 generations. Basically, what it is, a one-child policy is a halving of your population in 1 generation, right? So it's not a trivial thing. And it has now changed the character of Chinese family life. So you have entire generations who have grown up without siblings. So simply removing the one-child policy has had no impact on the number of children born because people are not used to having siblings. Now, in fact, the people who are having kids are themselves not have siblings. So forget siblings, they don't even have cousins. So, this is messing around with sociology is a very dangerous thing. And I totally do not think it's too late to have these one-child policy or any kind of population type controls in India. There's no need for it because our population is already stabilizing very rapidly.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your question.
I
Can
agree.
we have last two?
No, I don't have a
Okay, no more.
So he can make a statement. And
Okay.
Oh,
I'll take this opportunity to just draw your attention. I'm the MSME. As President Sir was talking, you are about the bankruptcy code and the biggest sufferer is the MSME sector. Hypothetically, if there's a unscrupulous party who enters the market, buys material of 70 to 80 or 1 lakh, buys from 15 parties, he makes away with 15 lakhs. The legal cost of recovering this money is more than the money. This is where MSME sector is suffering. I take this opportunity to bring to, since you're part of the national think tank, is how we can link the compulsion of payment to GST input, number 1. Number 2, create a separate, some forum, I'm not an expert, where MSME can approach with their bills and it has to be settled in, say, 24, 48 or whatever. If the party has accepted the GST input, this is just a suggestion from my part.
See, I am not. I'll have to think about it. I haven't.
No, I'm talking about if you can bring it to, this is the national problem from MSME. We are not, we don't have the voice to reach out. It's an opportunity to meet you today.
Okay.
Is how we can recover dues from 50,000 to 2 lakhs rupees because the cost of legal cost is that 2 lakhs. And we are losing lots of money in this and in the system to which people are coming in just to lose this money. And we don't have a difference.
We have, yeah, it's a matter of another, it's a fairly complex issue also. I'll just warn you against adding too many things onto asking the GST to do things which actually the legal system's job.
No,
If
I
you-
want the legal problem. Sorry.
Yes, so that, my view, and I haven't thought about your topic, but as a general principle of administration, do not ask one system to do the job of another system. Because so if some system is functioning, saying, oh, this system is functioning and that system is not functioning, therefore let us ask this guy to do this, is usually a bad idea. Because you will end up loading the GST with responsibilities which it is not designed to do, and this system will also break down. The solution ultimately is to get the legal system to work. The legal system not working is a cancer that is affecting all kinds of other things. So there's no point in trying to solve it in all kinds of other things. You have to solve the cancer. So I strongly urge that this problem, these are small claims courts they exist, but they don't function. So this is an issue that we need to solve by solving the actual source of the problem.
Judicial reform.
This is a judicial reform problem. Do not try to solve it through the GST system. The GST system already has enough frictions in it that need to be solved. If I add another one, the unintended consequence of that will infect all kinds of other things as a general principle. So as I said, I haven't thought about your particular suggestion, but I think we need to solve the legal system. We can't let them off. We cannot let them off.
The last question from the media.
Yes, the gentleman then.
Our census was done in 2011 and the next was supposed to be due in 2021. But maybe due to COVID or some other reason it was not done. So what is the plan?
So of course, the census needs to be done. I think the delay was for obvious reasons. That in the middle of COVID, the last thing you wanted is people going from home to home and spreading the disease. Not only would they get infected, they would also be literally affecting the rest of the country. So because of COVID, it got thrown off, and then in 21 and then 22 also, we were not so sure about the situation. So I think there is a case for doing it. I am not the Registrar General. You should ask the Registrar General, but of course, census needs to be done.
Naresh, wait a vote of thanks.
Yeah.
Last.
And before that, sir, if we could present a memento like always to Mr. Sanyal. Yeah. Can we have the memento, please? President would be presenting.
Oh, very nice.
Mr. Pachesia, Senior Vice President, would be delivering the vote of thanks.
Mr. Sanyal, members of the chamber, guests and friends. As this exclusive session comes to an end, it's my pleasure and privilege to propose a very hearty vote of thanks to Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, member, Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, Government of India. Thank you, sir, for kindly sparing some of your valuable time to visit the chamber once again and sharing your enriching observations on the long-term reform agenda for India. In fact, each answer that you gave to all the questions were in themselves a learning event, actually. It's indeed very nice of you to have taken the effort to address us. Over the last few years, the structural reforms initiatives taken up by the Government of India have undoubtedly played a pivotal role in making India a shining star on the global economic landscape in general and large emerging economies in particular, making it more resilient. I am confident that in the years to come, policymakers like you will steer India secure a position of global superpower amidst the uncertainties all around. Please let us know how we at Bharat Chamber of Commerce can play a supportive role in your efforts, sir. I would like to bring a small but important issue to your kind notice and record. Sir, delay in issuing prior approval by the Ministry of Fertilizers for export of single superphosphate fertilizers from India to Nepal is creating difficulties for the exporters, reducing exports at a time when the Government of India is otherwise encouraging exports. Our representation to the concerned ministry has not evoked response and business is facing uncertainty. Sir, it is our humble request to you to take up this matter with the PMO for an early solution. A detailed presentation will be mailed to you separately. I also thank representatives of the media for their presence at the session. With these words, I now request all of you to join me in carrying a hearty vote of thanks to Shri Sanjeev Sanyal with appreciative acclamation. Thank you.
I did my